Hi everyone, today's topic is about utility analysis and how it applies to human resource development. Okay, so let me ask you a question. How are most training programs evaluated? What do you think? Have a think about the last time you attended training. How was this evaluated? Well, for most organisations, the evaluation, if any, takes the form of asking the participants about their satisfaction with the training program. But as we know, as HR managers and HR analysts, we should be evaluating the link between the training and the strategic outcomes of the organisation. Okay, so here we have a model where we can look at how training is evaluated. This model is based on Kirkpatrick's work, if you want to investigate this further. Specifically, most training evaluation involves asking the trainees about their satisfaction with the program. You can see this in the bottom part of the triangle. The next level involves checking whether the trainees learnt anything. Next, we could check whether the trainees changed their own behaviour as a result of the training, and therefore we're starting to establish the impact of the training. We could also check to see if the training improved performance, and therefore looking at results. Finally, and as you know, a big part of our unit, we could look at whether the investment in the training program resulted in a positive return on investment for this organisation. Therefore, in the top parts of the triangle, you can see that we are linking the training program to the strategic goals of the organisation. But, as you know, this is not normally done, and most organisations simply measure satisfaction. There are other ways that we can assess training. There are plenty of studies, including meta-analytic studies, which look at the positive benefits of different types of training, their content, the methods used, and so on. Also, your textbook talks about a study by Bassi, Harrison, Ludwig and McMurray, 2004, where they wanted to determine whether there was a relationship between investments in training at the organisational level and changes in the organisation's stock price. This hypothesised relationship is shown on the slide. Through their research and after controlling for a lot of extraneous variables, they did indeed find a significant positive relationship. They further tested the directionality by examining these relationships across multiple years. What they found is a significant relationship where the training in the previous year led to stock returns in the current year. So this provides some evidence of causality. However, as we know, an experimental design is needed to fully determine if this is the case. Okay, another thing we need to think about is whether there was a third variable, which we sometimes call a lurking or hidden variable, that explains this relationship. So if you think about the findings, we can think about the findings and explain these in a number of ways. The main ways that I can think of are that the investment in training does indeed improve an organisation's financial situation. But this may not be the case. It may be investment in the training is simply a measure of the organisation's long-term view. A third explanation that could equally be valid is that training spend may simply reflect the state of the organisation and its health and financial situation in the future. Okay, so back to the LAMP model. In your book, Cassio and Boudreau start with the logic model. As you can see, this logic model shows that training effectiveness is not simply the result of a good training program. Initially, the training candidates must be ready and motivated to learn, and therefore the organisation needs to invest in the selection and preparation of candidates. Also, the organisation needs to invest in the development programs and in measuring their immediate effect, such as reactions and learnings. As well, the environment must be supportive so that the trained employees may apply and transfer their learning to the work. And lastly, employee development is of course connected to all the other HR topics that we've discussed in this unit, and therefore the organisation probably should also invest in measuring the improvements to performance, staffing, reduced turnover and absenteeism. As we've discussed in the last few lectures, when we consider the utility of training, we're really considering the amount of improvement in the quality of those being trained beyond what would have occurred without the training program. We've previously discussed the Taylor-Russell model, the Naylor-Shine model, and the Brogdon-Cronbach-Lisa model in relation to selection, performance, and now training. So the Taylor-Russell model is based on the premise that larger differences in terms of percentages of successful employees will result in benefits to the organisation and justify the use of a particular selection tool. The Naylor-Shine model is based on the premise that larger increases in the average criterion score will result in benefits to the organisation and justify that particular selection tool. But as we've discussed, neither of these two models consider the cost of these programs nor the benefit in dollar terms. As a result, we look at a later utility model, the BCG model, which incorporates the cost of the program into the equation, and therefore the dollar gain of a particular program can be calculated. It's important to note that the BCG model has some assumptions. It assumes that there's a linear relationship between the predictor and criterion, and that we have a normal distribution for predictor scores and criterion scores. These assumptions are necessary, as they were for the Naylor-Shine model, so that the part of the formula in which the mean z-scores equals lambda over the selection ratio, so that this works, as it relies on a normal distribution. Brogdon 1949 and Cronbach and Gleaser in 1965 showed that if you know the standard deviation of performance, that is the distribution of the criterion, you can use the other information to work out the gain in dollars from using the HR program. So yet again, here is the utility formula which we discussed in relation to selection. This basic equation for calculating staff utility is changed for measuring the utility for HRD programs, in that dt is substituted for r subscript xy multiplied by x, which, as we know, is the validity coefficient multiplied by the average standard score on the predictor achieved by those who were selected. The adjusted formula is on the next slide. Here is the utility equation for the human resource development programs. Take a look at what is included to calculate utility. We have the number of individuals trained, the expected duration of the benefits, so how long we expect the benefits of the training to last, dt, or the true difference between the trained group and the untrained group, and this is in standardised units, the standard deviation of the performance of the untrained group in dollars, and lastly, of course, the total cost of the training. Here, the change in utility, represented by delta U, is the gain for the organisation in dollar terms from the training program. Let's look more into how we calculate dt. So here is the formula to work out dt in the utility equation on the previous slide. X bar t is the average job performance score of the trained group, X bar U is the average job performance of the untrained group, and D is the effect size, so what we're trying to calculate. And SD, subscript X, is the standard deviation of the job performance for the total group, meaning the trained and the untrained group combined. Here on this slide there are two normal distributions, one for the trained group and one for the untrained group. So when we are talking about the effect size, or D, we are referring to the difference between the average performance of each group. Here, the light blue group, or the light blue distribution, is our trained group. As you can see, their average performance is higher than the average performance of the untrained group, so the dark blue distribution. Please note that these are standardised scores and hence Z scores on the distributions. You can also see here that there is some overlap between the trained and the untrained groups. D is therefore the difference between the average for the two groups, taking into account the standard deviation. We can use the utility formula by setting delta U, the change in utility, to 0 to actually work out our break-even point, which could be very useful. By calculating the utility and break-even values for our training program, we can respectively determine our expected case and worst case scenarios. In the utility formula, we need to estimate T, the expected duration of the benefits of the training, which, if you think about it, is quite difficult. One approach suggested is the Delphi method, which is where we get a group of subject matter experts to provide judgments about the duration of the training effect. The experts provide their opinions anonymously, and this information then is fed back to the group for discussion, and then this cycle continues until there is consensus. So this is seen as quite a good way to estimate T. Lastly, we need to think about, with utility analysis and HRD programs, economic considerations. So things like employee flows, variable costs, taxes, and discounting. Okay, so for this lecture, I've set a class activity that involves a scenario about firefighters. Have a look at the handout. And I've provided output for you to read through, and in this activity you compare the break-even analysis to the utility analysis. So have a go at this, and good luck. Okay, lastly, as we're finishing up the unit very soon, I wanted to refer you to an article about algorithm aversion. So this is an excellent read, and it's really a message around the process in terms of the LAMP model. So here are the main findings on the slide for this particular article. Overall, what this article is saying is that even though algorithms outperform human forecasters, people prefer human forecasters. So we need to accept this when we're thinking about how we're making change as a result of our HR analytics. And we really need to be cognizant of this and allow people some input into forecasting, even though we know a better outcome could be achieved without this human input. So just something to think about, and really great article to read if you have the chance. Okay, so for our next seminar, we have 2 guest speakers coming in to see us from INPEX. We're lucky enough to have the General Manager for HR, Craig Hunter, coming to talk to us. And he will talk more generally about INPEX, what they're doing, their strategic direction and so on. And we know this is important as HR initiatives need to be assessed against these strategic objectives. Next, we're lucky enough to have Raylene Boltel, and she's a HR analyst at INPEX. She's been heavily involved in establishing the new HR systems to enable better HR analytics at INPEX. So specifically, INPEX is now using SAP for their HR analytics. Anyway, I'll let Craig and Raylene, or Ray, explain this further. One thing I wanted you to think about, because when we have guest speakers, sometimes question time can be a little bit quiet. So I would like you to think about 3 questions that you would like to ask Craig and Ray. Okay, so well done everyone. You'll be relieved to know that all the content for the unit is over, and our next class, which is our last class, we'll be hearing from our guest speakers and then working through exam revision. See you then, and really well done everyone. Great work.